But Charles all of a sudden found some everything in the shed to make it make sense. It didn't make no sense. Hey y'all, welcome and or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. Alright y'all, so today we're just going to be jumping right into the case. And today's case takes place in Arcadia, Florida. And it's mainly centered around a man named James Joseph Richardson. And he was born on December 26, 1935. And at the time of the case taking place, he lived in Arcadia, Florida with his wife, Annie Mae Richardson, and their 7 kids. They had little Betty, who was 8 years old, Alice, who was 7, Susie, who was 6, Doreen was 5, Vanessa was 4, Diane was 3, and little James Jr. was 2. So back to back to back to back to back. They had kids like pow, 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 pow. And what it sounds like to me is that they was trying for a little boy, but they just kept getting girls until finally little James Jr. came along, and then they called it quits. But nonetheless, that was the dynamic of this household. It was James, Annie Mae, and their 7 kids. Now, James and Annie Mae, they ran what I would call a pretty standard household, where the both of them worked outside of the house. And as a matter of fact, they actually worked together in an orange grove about 15 miles away from the house. So they kept up a pretty steady routine. So Annie would wake up around 6 o'clock in the morning. She would get herself ready for work, and then she would wake up James and the kids. And she would get the kids ready, she would cook breakfast, and she would also cook the kids lunch for the day as well. And of course, she would make herself and James lunch. And then around the time that Betty and James would be leaving for work, a babysitter would come to watch the kids. Now, this babysitter wasn't watching all 7 of the kids because the older 4 had already started school. And so she was just essentially taking care of the younger 3 kids. And this babysitter's name was Betsy Reese, who went by Bessie. But in Arcadia, everybody pretty much called her Big Mama. Now, she was originally from Jacksonville, Florida, but she had moved to Arcadia after the death of her 2nd husband. And I guess just to start a new life, start over, not really just wanting to be in the place where she had lost so much. She just wanted a new start. And once she got to Arcadia, she moved in next door to the Richardsons. And so that's how they met. Now, Bessie, she was described as being the jealous type with a temper. Then y'all know when people are called Big Mama, that's like the grandma type, the mama who really don't play that. Big Mama, you know what I'm saying? So anyways, it's October 25th, 1967, and the day is progressing as normal. Annie Mae and James go through their normal routine. Bessie comes over as usual to take care of the younger 3 children, and everything seems to be going normally, but that's how it always starts. Everything seems to be going good until it's not. Now, the older kids are at school. Bessie's at home with the other 3 kids. And 12 o'clock rolls around. And once again, as per usual, the older 4 kids come home for lunch. Now, I told y'all that Annie Mae would prepare lunch for herself, James, and the children. But that wasn't just for the kids that was staying at home. That was also for the kids that went to school. Now, I don't know what kind of school they went to let them come home for lunch. But baby, I would have loved to have gone home for lunch at my school. But nonetheless, they come home and they eat lunch with their younger siblings. And once lunchtime was over, Betty, Susie, Alice, and Doreen headed back to school, while Vanessa, Diane, and little James did whatever they did with Bessie. Not too long after the kids had returned back to school, one of the teachers noticed that these kids was getting pretty ill. And I'm just gonna guess because there wasn't a clear description of the symptoms that the kids were having, but I'm just going to guess that the kids started to get violently ill to the point where the principal actually had to take all 4 of these children to the hospital. And being as though these kids had just went home to eat, the principal felt like he should have somebody go check on the other kids. And shout out to these teachers and principals because immediate action was taken. Like I said, the principal took them to the hospital and then had a teacher go to the kids' house to check on the other kids to make, like, just to see what was up. And once the teacher got there, she found that the other 3 kids were violently ill as well. And just a little side note right here, what was Bessie doing? Why she didn't take them to the hospital? Did she not have a car? I don't know. Now, this is obviously suspicious. All 7 kids of the same family getting sick at the same time right after eating lunch. Like, okay, guys. So the police ended up going to the hospital and talking to the nursing staff. And they ended up coming to the conclusion that pretty much all the kids had been poisoned. So the officer who was initially at the hospital ended up going over to the Richardson's house to do a search, trying to see like if they could see any signs of a poisoning agent, anything that could have caused these kids to be this sick. But the only thing that the officer found while he was at the house was some insect spray. Now, while this could have caused somebody to be sick, the officer didn't think that this was the cause of the children's illness. Now, why he didn't think that, I don't know. But the insect spray was all they found, and he didn't think that that was what caused these kids to get sick. So he just let that go. An officer who searched the Richardson's home was named Joseph Monaghan, and he would end up going back and forth between the hospital and the Richardson home to see if he could gather any evidence, but then also checking on the kids at the hospital as well. So he was back and forth. But in between him going back and forth, there was some other officers who was at the house doing the search as well. And they noticed that there was a little shed in the back of where the Richardsons stayed at. And so these officers decided to go check in the shed to see if they could see anything that could have caused these kids to be ill like this also. But once again, they didn't find anything. So even though they had this strong suspicion of poisoning, they didn't find any evidence of any poisoning agent in the house, in the shed, or nothing, even after multiple searches. And unfortunately, by the end of that same day, 6 of the 7 Richardson children will have passed away. The only survivor was 3-year-old Diane. And as you can imagine, once the Richardson kids passed away, the investigation picked up. Not that it wasn't already important, but it was like amplified times 6. They needed to figure out what happened, and if they were in fact poisoned, was it on accident, was it on purpose, and who did it? So what the detectives ended up doing was taking samples from all of the kids' lunch plates and sent it off for testing. And unfortunately, on the very next day after the 6 children passed away, little Diane also ended up succumbing to whatever this was that had plagued her family. So eventually the testing comes back from the lunch plates, and the assumption that the kids had been poisoned was actually correct, because what was found on them lunch plates, they said there was enough poison on those lunch plates to kill the population of a large city. So there was absolutely no way that these kids were surviving that at all. So detectives start talking to friends, family, and anybody who knew the Richardsons, just to try to get a picture of what this family was like. And pretty much, like I said in the beginning, this was your average family. Mom and dad worked, kids went to school, babysitter for the other kids. There was not much to say about this family. So they really didn't get too much from these conversations, but what they did get was a tip. And that tip came from Bessie. Bessie called the police and told them that one of their neighbors, one of her and the Richardsons' neighbors named Charles Smith, had found something out in the shed. So detectives immediately want to know, what did Charles find? And would you not believe it, Charles found a poisoning agent in the shed. It was called Pyrethrin. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know, not 100% sure, but that's what it looks like on paper. So this Pyrethrin bag was just there in the shed when the detectives went to go see if this was even a valid tip. And not too long after they found this Pyrethrin in the shed, they went and arrested James for suspicion of murder, because who else? Now, James didn't have enough money to hire a lawyer, but these 2 lawyers who were actually civil lawyers and not criminal lawyers, they offered to represent James for free. And these lawyers wanted him out of jail right away. They wanted him out on bail because they said that the prosecution didn't have enough evidence to hold James on suspicion of murder. There was literally no evidence against James. So his lawyers wanted him out on bail ASAP. And the judge agreed that there wasn't enough evidence to hold him, so he did let him out on bail. It was a $7,500 bail. But very shortly after James was let out, his bail would get revoked because an inmate that he was in jail with came forward and said that James confessed to him about killing his 7 kids. So the judge was like, well, if you confess to somebody, then, sir, you need to be back in jail. So they threw him back in jail to await trial. And his trial started in May 1968. And basically, the prosecution presented a case saying that James poisoned his kids for a $500 each life insurance policy that he had taken out on them just days before the poisoning. And as witnesses, they had 2 of 3 inmates who came forward saying that James actually did confess to all 3 of them, but they couldn't get the 3rd person to testify because he had died. But they did have these statements from the 2 living inmates. Now, the defense presented an argument that there was absolutely no proof that James was the person who committed this crime, and that there was just literally no evidence of him having, owning, or obtaining Pyrethrin at any point, ever. But the jury will end up siding with the prosecution, only taking 1 hour to find James guilty. And with that, James was sentenced to death. However, that's not the end of this case though, because there was so much doubt that surrounded James's guilt. And one man in particular named Mark Lane, he was a lawyer, decided to look into this further. He just couldn't get it off his mind that he felt like James was not guilty of this crime. And once Mark decided to look further into this case, he found that the prosecution had a couple of inconsistencies that were overlooked in this trial. And one of those inconsistencies was that there was Pyrethrin that was found in the grits that the family had that morning. Now, the whole family had these grits. And if that were the case, the amount of Pyrethrin that was in the grits would have also killed James and Annie Mae. So that didn't make sense. And so therefore, the poison had to have been put inside of the grits after James and Annie Mae left for work, meaning that James nor Annie Mae could have been the one to put the Pyrethrin in the grits. Also, detectives never talked to Charlie, even though he was the one who found the Pyrethrin in the shed after they had done multiple searches of the shed and didn't find no Pyrethrin. But Charles all of a sudden found some Pyrethrin in the shed to make it make sense. It didn't make no sense. And we're going to come back to Mark in a second. But in 1971, James tried to appeal his case. However, it was denied. But he wouldn't be sent to death row because in 1972, the U.S. decided that capital punishment was unconstitutional. And all of the inmates, I believe, who had been sentenced to death had their sentences, like, they had to be resentenced. And James ended up being resentenced to 25 to life. So he was still pretty much going to spend the rest of his life in jail, but they wasn't going to kill him. So now back to Mark. He really just couldn't let it go. He was 10 toes on this one. So what he ended up doing was in 1980, he hired a private investigator to pretty much just go around, try to find some witnesses, find anybody who was close to the case to see what they said. And this private investigator ended up finding Charlie Smith, you know, the one who found the Pyrethrin in the shed. Yeah, he found him and he talked to Charlie. And this private investigator said that Charlie told him that him and Bessie was chilling on the porch, and he asked Bessie what happened. And Bessie told him that Richard had poisoned his kids. And then she took him to the shed, showed him the poison, and was like, that's what he killed them with. Something ain't cleaning the buttermilk here. But that wasn't even the biggest, like, oh my gosh, in this case. Because in 1986, Bessie, who was now in a nursing home, she confessed to being the one who poisoned the kids. She said it was her. And I think it was one of the nursing staff who had divulged that piece of information. And so after getting all this information, Mark really dug his feet in. And in 1988, he had led a Free James rally in Arcadia. And once he did that, he got a call from an anonymous source who gave him access to evidence that the prosecution had withheld during James's trial. So in this little box of evidence, Mark finds out that the two inmates who have testified, the two of them had completely different stories of what James had said. So either James was out here telling two different stories, or these two was lying. And it turns out that the life insurance that the prosecution said that James killed the kids for, he never got the life insurance because he couldn't afford the premium. He did, in fact, talk to somebody about getting life insurance for him, his wife, and the kids. However, the policy never went into effect because he could not pay the premium. Bessie's criminal history was in that little box too. So in 1967, when these murders occurred, Bessie was out on parole after she spent 4 years in prison for killing her ex-husband. You remember that second husband that I told you had passed away and then she moved from Jacksonville to Arcadia? Yeah, she killed him. She shot him in 1956. Now, why was she out on parole? I don't know. I'm feeling like she should have been the one with the 25 to life here. It also said that she was suspected of killing her first husband by poisoning. However, that could never be proven. And so that's just speculation there. I'm not going to put it past her because she did shoot and kill her second husband. I'm just saying. Hey y'all, so I'm editing today's video and I realized that I forgot to tell y'all something. Mark, or the private investigator, got in contact with one of the inmates who testified against James in trial. This guy told them that pretty much the only reason he testified against James in that trial was because he was threatened. And so it turns out that the inmates, they were lying. James never confessed to anything. And secondly, I think it was the private investigator this time who had gotten in contact with one of the jurors from the trial. And this juror said that in the deliberation room, nobody really felt like there was enough evidence to convict James of this crime. But all Negroes lie anyway. And so they just found him guilty. But yeah, I just wanted to tell y'all that right fast. So now back to non-editing me. So after this little treasure trove of evidence is found, 2 years would pass before an attorney named Ellis Rubin would get a hold of the case. And he decided that he was going to represent James pro bono. He wanted to get James's case retried. So in 1989, he presented all the evidence that he had. He presented this little box of evidence, this little treasure trove of stuff that the prosecution had withheld in the first trial. And on April 25th, 1989, a judge ended up overturning James's conviction and sentence. James was now 53 years old. He had spent 21 years in prison, and he had maintained his innocence from day one. He never wavered in his innocence, and he was released on bond to await his new trial. However, a new trial wouldn't even have to happen because in May of 1989, all of the charges were dropped. Now, I'm sure y'all won't find this surprising, but Bessie is believed to be the one who had actually poisoned the kids, because it said that her and James had gotten into it not too long prior to everything happening. But I already told y'all, by this time, Bessie was in a nursing home. She was suffering from Alzheimer's, and Karma seemed to be kicking her ass pretty well. So the police did not pursue her or press any charges against her for this crime. And plus, they didn't really have no solid evidence against her either. So these 7 babies essentially got no type of justice. 1993 or 1992, I'm not 100% sure, Bessie would end up dying. Nothing was really ever done about the situation. Nobody was ever held accountable for taking 7 innocent children's lives. Now, as far as James goes, he did end up receiving a check in 2016 for the amount of $50,000 for every single year that he was imprisoned, which came out to be roughly $1,050,000. And if you ask me, that's really not enough, because I'm pretty sure that money is taxed. And to be fair, I don't know if that's the only check he ever received, but it's the government. They're really not trying to give you no money, so. But yeah, y'all, that is all I have for today's case. Thank you so very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what y'all think about this case. Do y'all think Bessie did it for real? Or is that just speculation as well? What y'all think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. But nonetheless, they come home to eat lunch with their kids, and that particular day, And on that particular day, oh my God. And so James, oh wait, no. And so the lawyer, no, okay, I'll figure out one of them will work. Which came out to be roughly $1,500